Richard John Santorum, SMOM, is an American attorney and Republican Party politician. He served as a United States Senator representing Pennsylvania and was the Senate's third-ranking Republican. He ran as a candidate for the 2012 Republican Party presidential nomination, finishing second to the eventual Republican nominee Mitt Romney.Santorum was elected as a United States Senator for Pennsylvania in 1994. He served 2 terms until losing his re-election bid in 2006. A devout, practicing Catholic, Santorum is a social conservative who opposes same-sex marriage and artificial birth control. While serving as a senator, Santorum was the author of what came to be known as the Santorum Amendment, which promoted the teaching of intelligent design. In 2005, Santorum introduced the Workplace Religious Freedom Act along with Senator John Kerry. In the years following his departure from the Senate, Santorum worked as a consultant, private practice lawyer, and news contributor. On June 6, 2011, Santorum announced his run for the Republican nomination in the 2012 U.S. presidential election. Upon announcing his campaign suspension on April 10, 2012, he had won 11 primaries and caucuses and received nearly 4 million votes, making him the runner-up to eventual nominee Mitt Romney. Santorum officially endorsed Romney on May 7, 2012. On May 27, 2015, Santorum announced his candidacy for the 2016 presidential election. He ended his campaign on February 3, 2016. Early life and education. Richard John Santorum was born in Winchester, Virginia. He is the middle of the 3 children of Aldo Santorum, a clinical psychologist who immigrated to the United States at age 7 from Riva del Garda, Italy, and Catherine Santorum, an administrative nurse who is of Italian and Irish ancestry. Santorum grew up in Berkeley County, West Virginia, and Butler County, Pennsylvania. In West Virginia, his family lived in an apartment provided by the Veterans Administration. Santorum attended elementary school at Butler Catholic School and then went on to the Butler Senior High School. He was nicknamed Rooster, supposedly for both a cowlick strand of hair and an assertive nature, particularly on important political issues. After his parents transferred to the Naval Station Great Lakes in northern Illinois, Santorum attended the Roman Catholic Carmel High School in Mundelein, Illinois, for 1 year, graduating in 1976. Santorum attended Pennsylvania State University for his undergraduate studies, serving as chairman of the university's College Republicans chapter and graduating with a BA degree with honors in political science in 1980. While at Penn State, Santorum joined the Tau Epsilon Phi fraternity. He then completed a 1-year MBA program at the University of Pittsburgh's Joseph M. Katz Graduate School of Business, graduating in 1981. In 1986, Santorum received a JD degree with honors from Dickinson School of Law. Early career. Santorum first became actively involved in politics in the 1970s through volunteering for Senator John Hines, a Republican from Pennsylvania. Additionally, while working on his law degree, Santorum was an administrative assistant to Republican State Senator Doyle Corman, serving as director of the Pennsylvania Senate's Local Government Committee from 1981 to 1984, then director of its Transportation Committee. After graduating, Santorum was admitted to the Pennsylvania Bar and practiced law for 4 years at the Pittsburgh law firm Kirkpatrick & Amp Lockhart, a firm known for raising political candidates and lobbyists. As an associate, he successfully lobbied on behalf of the World Wrestling Federation to deregulate professional wrestling, arguing that it should be exempt from federal anabolic steroid regulations because it was entertainment, not a sport. Santorum left his private law practice in 1990 after his election to the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives. Having been groomed by Kirkpatrick and Amp Lockhart, Santorum decided Democratic Congressman Doug Walgren was vulnerable, and took up residence in Walgren's district. Needing money and political support, he courted GOP activist and major donor Elsie Hillman, the chair of the state Republican Party. In 1990, at age 32, Santorum was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district, located in the eastern suburbs of Pittsburgh. He scored a significant upset in the heavily Democratic district, defeating seven-term Democratic incumbent Doug Walgren by a 51% to 49% margin. During his campaign, Santorum repeatedly criticized Walgren for living outside the district for most of the year. Although the 18th district was redrawn for the 1992 elections, and the new district had a 3-to-1 ratio of registered Democrats to Republicans, Santorum still won re-election with 61% of the vote. In 1993, Santorum was one of 17 House Republicans who sided with most Democrats to support legislation that prohibited employers from permanently replacing striking employees. He also joined a minority of Republicans to vote against the North American Free Trade Agreement that year. As a member of the Gang of Seven, Santorum was involved in exposing members of Congress involved in the House banking scandal. U.S. Senate tenure. Santorum served in the United States Senate representing Pennsylvania from 1995 to 2007. From 2001 until 2007, he was the Senate's third-ranking Republican. He was first elected to the Senate during the 1994 Republican takeover, narrowly defeating incumbent Democrat Harris Wofford 49% to 47%. The theme of Santorum's 1994 campaign signs was, "Join the fight." During the race, he was considered an underdog, as his opponent was 32 years his senior. He was re-elected in 2000, defeating U.S. Congressman Ron Klink by a 52 to 46% margin. In his re-election bid of 2006, he lost to Democrat Bob Casey, Jr. by a 59 to 41% margin. After his election to the Senate in 1994, Santorum sought to practice what preached, and hired 5 people for his staff who were on welfare, food stamps, or other government aid. In 1996, Santorum served as chairman of the Republican Party Task Force on Welfare Reform, and contributed to legislation that became the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act. Santorum was an author and the floor manager of the bill. In 1996, Santorum endorsed moderate Republican Arlen Specter in his short-lived campaign for president. Reporters have observed that though Santorum and Specter differed on social policy, Specter provided him with key political staff for his successful run in 1994. The National Taxpayers Union, a fiscal conservative organization, gave Santorum an A score for his votes on fiscal issues, meaning that he was one of the strongest supporters of responsible tax and spending policies during his tenure, and ranked 5th in the group's rankings out of 50 senators who served at the same time. Legislative proposals. Religious freedom initiatives. In 2002, Santorum was a co-sponsor of that year's attempt to pass the Workplace Religious Freedom Act. The bill had first been introduced in the Senate by Senator John Kerry in 1996, having been introduced in the House by Wahida Gerald Nadler in 1994. Although Santorum was in the Senate at the time, he was not a sponsor of the bill when it was introduced in 1996, or when it was reintroduced in 1997 and 1999. Once signed on as a co-sponsor, Santorum remained so throughout his tenure in the Senate. Santorum founded the Congressional Working Group on Religious Freedom in 2003. The working group included members of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and met monthly to address issues such as the Workplace Religious Freedom Act, tax-exempt status for churches, the CARE Act, international religious freedom, and anti-Semitism. Teaching of evolution and intelligent design. Santorum added to the 2001 No Child Left Behind bill a provision that would have provided more freedom to schools in teaching about the origins of life, including the teaching of intelligent design alongside evolution. The bill, with the Santorum amendment included, passed the Senate 91-8 and was hailed as a victory by intelligent design promoters. However, before the bill became law, scientific and educational groups successfully urged its conference committee to strike the Santorum amendment from the final version. Intelligent design supporters in Congress then preserved the language of the Santorum amendment in the conference committee report of the legislative history of the bill. The Discovery Institute and other intelligent design proponents point to this report as a clear endorsement by Congress of the importance of teaching a variety of scientific views about the theory of evolution. In 2002, Santorum called intelligent design a legitimate scientific theory that should be taught in science classes. But by 2005 he had adopted the Teach the Controversy approach. He told National Public Radio, "I'm not comfortable with intelligent design being taught in the science classroom. What we should be teaching are the problems and holes in the theory of evolution." Later that year, Santorum resigned from the advisory board of the Christian Rights Thomas More Law Center after the center's lawyers lost a case representing a school board that had required the teaching of intelligent design. Santorum, who had previously supported the school board's policy, indicated he had not realized that certain members of the board had been motivated by religious beliefs. Santorum critics said he was backtracking from his earlier position because he was facing a tough re-election fight for 2006. When asked in November 2011 about his views on evolution, Santorum stated that he believes that evolution occurred on a tiny, micro level. National Weather Service Duties Act. Santorum introduced the National Weather Service Duties Act of 2005, which aimed to prohibit the National Weather Service from releasing weather data to the public without charge where private sector entities perform the same function commercially. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association was organizing a lobbying effort in opposition to the legislation, but it never passed committee. The motivations surrounding the bill were controversial, as employees of AccuWeather, a commercial weather company based in Pennsylvania, donated $10,500 to Santorum and his PAC. The liberal advocacy group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington cited the bill as one of several reasons for listing Santorum as one of its most corrupt politicians. In support of the bill, Santorum criticized the National Weather Service in September 2005, saying its evacuation warnings for Hurricane Katrina were insufficient. Foreign policy. Santorum is a supporter of the War on Terror and shares the views of neoconservatives and the Bush Doctrine in regard to foreign policy. Santorum felt that the war in Iraq was justified, and, in 2006, declared that weapons of mass destruction had been found in Iraq. Santorum made the declaration regarding WMDs based, in part, on declassified portions of the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command. The report stated that coalition forces had recovered approximately 500 weapons munitions that contained degraded or vacant mustard, SR and nerve agent casings. The specific weapons he referred to were chemical munitions dating back to the Iran-Iraq War that were buried in the early 1990s. The report stated that while agents had degraded to an unknown degree, they remained dangerous and possibly lethal. However, officials of the Department of Defense, CIA intelligence analysts, and the White House have all explicitly stated that these expired casings were not part of the WMD's threat that the Iraq War was launched to contain. He says the war on terror can be won and is optimistic about U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan in the long term. Santorum has defended the treatment of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, specifically defended waterboarding, and stated that John McCain, who opposes the practice, doesn't understand how enhanced interrogation works. Santorum called the war in Afghanistan a very winnable operation in 2012, dismissing efforts for withdrawal by 2014. He similarly criticized President Obama's foreign policy, saying he was not focused on trying to win the war in Afghanistan, and said he was against any withdrawal in Iraq in 2012, saying, "We want victory." He supports U.S. political intervention and economic sanctions against state sponsors of terrorism. Santorum views Islamic fascism in Iran as the center of the world's conflict, and his geopolitical strategy for peace involves the United States promoting a strong Lebanon, a strong Israel, and a strong Iraq. Quote, he sponsored the Syria Accountability Act of 2003 to require Syria cease all activity with Lebanon and end all support for terrorism. In 2005, Santorum sponsored the Iran Freedom and Support Act, which appropriated $10 million aimed at regime change in Iran. The act passed with overwhelming support. However, Santorum nevertheless voted against the Lautenberg Amendment, which would have closed the loophole that allows companies like Halliburton to do business with Iran through the foreign affiliates. Santorum reflected on his last year in the Senate as one spent talking a lot about Iran, and was characterized by the Atlantic Wire as an extreme hawk in his approach with Iran. Santorum stated that Iran was the creator of Hezbollah and the driving force of Hamas. He said Iran was at the center of much of the world's conflict, but he was opposed to direct military action against the country in 2006. Santorum was one of only 2 senators who voted against confirming the nomination of Robert Gates as Secretary of Defense. Santorum stated that his objection was to Gates's support for talking with Iran and Syria, because it would be an error to talk with radical Islamists, party leadership and other actions. Santorum became chairman of the Senate Republican Conference in 2000, the party's third-ranking leadership position in the Senate. In that role, Santorum directed the communications operations of Senate Republicans and was a frequent party spokesperson. He was the youngest member of the Senate leadership and the first Pennsylvanian to hold such a prominent position since Senator Hugh Scott was Republican leader in the 1970s. In addition, Santorum served on the Senate Agriculture Committee, the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs, the Senate Special Committee on Aging, and the Senate Finance Committee, of which he was the chairman of the Subcommittee on Social Security and Family Policy. He also sat at the Candy desk for 10 years. In January 2005, Santorum announced his intention to run for Senate Republican Whip, the second highest post in the Republican caucus after the 2006 election, saying he expected the incumbent Whip, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, to run for Senate Republican leader to succeed Bill Frist of Tennessee, who was planning to retire. As a result of Santorum's loss in the 2006 election, this plan was never realized. K Street Project Beginning in 1995, Republicans leaders such as Tom DeLay and Grover Norquist initiated an order to place Republicans in lobbying firm jobs, and exclude Democrats. In addition, the initiative pressured lobbying firms to contribute to Republican campaigns, by withholding access to lawmakers from firms that did not comply. The initiative became politically toxic for Republicans when the Jack Abramoff scandal broke in late 2004. Although some sources indicate that Santorum played a key role in the K Street project, Santorum has denied any involvement. In November 2005, several months after the indictments of Abramoff and DeLay, Santorum told the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, "The K Street project is purely to make sure we have qualified applicants for positions that are in town. From my perspective, it's a good government thing." A few months later, however, Santorum emphatically denied any connection with either the K Street project or Norquist, saying, "I had absolutely nothing to do, never met, never talked, never coordinated, never did anything with Grover Norquist and the quote K Street project." Quote. In January 2012, The Washington Post's fact-checker concluded that we can't prove definitively whether or not Santorum collaborated on the K Street project, saying that it depends on how you define the initiative. 2006 campaign. In 2006, Santorum sought re-election to a third Senate term. He ran unopposed in the Republican Party. His seat was considered among the most vulnerable for Republicans and was a prime target of the Democratic Party in the 2006 elections. George W. Bush had a 38% approval rating in Pennsylvania in 2006. Mary Eisenhower, a Democratic strategist, reflected on Santorum's campaign and his connection to the unpopular president. In 2006, we were doubly blessed. We could run against George W. Bush and Rick Santorum. Santorum chose to campaign alongside George W. Bush, and called him a terrific president, hurting his popularity. Also problematic was Santorum's 2004 endorsement of his Republican Senate colleague Arlen Specter over conservative Congressman Pat Toomey in the primary for Pennsylvania's other Senate seat. Many socially and fiscally conservative Republicans considered the Specter endorsement to be a betrayal of the cause. Santorum's opponent was Democratic State Treasurer Bob Casey, Jr., the son of popular former Governor Robert Casey, Sr. Casey was well known for his opposition to abortion, negating one of Santorum's key issues. For most of the campaign, Santorum trailed Casey by 15 points or more in polls. Green Party candidate Carl Romanelli failed to gain ballot access in the race, further hurting Santorum's chances. Reportedly, several of Santorum's supporters had funded and petitioned for Romanelli to siphon away Democrats from Casey. Santorum was mired in controversy and spent much of his time on the campaign in defense against his own past statements and positions. He faced criticism from his rival Casey and others for several statements in his book, It Takes a Family, including his denunciation of 1960s radical feminism, which he said had made it socially affirming to work outside the home at the expense of child care. In the book, Santorum also compared pro-choice Americans to German Nazis. John Brabender, an advisor to Santorum's Senate and presidential races, reflected back on the book's controversies and said Santorum was warned that sections could bring political damage, and Santorum was not willing to change much of it simply to gain moderate supporters. In addition, a past article Santorum wrote to the Catholic Online resurfaced in 2005, in which he linked liberalism and moral relativism in American society, particularly within seminaries, to the Roman Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. He wrote, "It is no surprise that Boston, a seat of academic, political and cultural liberalism in America, lies at the center of the storm." His remarks were heavily criticized, especially in Massachusetts, and he was asked for an explanation. Santorum did not retract his statement and defended his premise that it was no surprise that the center of the Catholic Church abuse took place in very liberal, or perhaps the nation's most liberal area, Boston. Quote, "In addition, the question of Santorum's association with the K Street Project was an issue that his opponent made use of during the campaign. Santorum stated that he spent maybe a month a year at his Pennsylvania home, raising allegations of hypocrisy as he had denounced his former opponent, Doug Walgren, for living away from his House district. Critics also complained that Pennsylvania taxpayers were paying 80% of the tuition for 5 of Santorum's children to attend an online cyber school, a benefit available only to Pennsylvania residents, when all his children lived in Virginia. The Penn Hills School District, which covered the tuition costs for the cyber school through local taxes, unsuccessfully filed a complaint against Santorum for reimbursement in 2005, but won reimbursement from the state in September 2006 in the amount of $55,000. In response, Santorum asked county officials to remove the homestead tax exemption from his Penn Hills property, saying he was entitled to it, but chose not to take it because of the political dispute. Since 2006, Santorum has been homeschooling his 7 children. Santorum responded to the dispute saying that his children should not be implicated in the politics of personal destruction. One of his children appeared in a 2006 re-election campaign ad saying, "My dad's opponents have criticized him for moving us to Washington so we could be with him more." Santorum ran a television ad suggesting that Casey's supporters had been under investigation for various crimes. The negative ad backfired, as the Scranton Times-Tribune found that all but a few of Casey's contributors donated when he was running for other offices, and none were investigated for anything. In fact, 2 of the persons cited in Santorum's campaign ad actually gave contributions to Santorum in 2006, and 1 died in 2004. Santorum's campaign countered that those donations were not kept, and had been donated to educational institutions. Toward the end of his campaign, Santorum shifted his theme to the threat of radical Islam. In October 2006 he gave a gathering storm speech, invoking British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's description of Europe prior to World War II, as evidence that Islamists were waging a more than 300-year-old crusade against the Western world. Santorum pointed to September 11, 1683, the date of the Battle of Vienna. Casey responded, "No one believes terrorists are going to be more likely to attack us because I defeat Rick Santorum," noting that he had been even more hawkish during this time period than President Bush. Santorum later said, "Maybe that wasn't the smartest political strategy, spending the last few months running purely on national security." A heated debate between the candidates occurred on October 11, 2006. Bill Toland of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette described both candidates' performances during the debate as unstatesmanlike. In the November 7, 2006 election, Santorum lost by over 700,000 votes, receiving 41% of the vote to Casey's 59%, the largest margin of defeat for an incumbent senator since 1980.